Welcome to episode 608 of the Barcelona podcast, brought to you by the Blue Wire Podcast Network. I'm Jed Hilton, and after a first weekend of action in the Liga, of course, I had to have on Ruri Barlow to help me get a snapshot of what's to come this season in Spain. And also, Ilkay Gundogan, it went official like an hour ago, so of course we're going to cover that as well. And Ruri, are you ready to watch an incredible amount of Spanish football again after hardly a 2-month break, even though we were also still watching the Euros and Olympics and all that stuff? But now it's back under the Liga banner.
Yeah, I was writing about this over the weekend, and I was come Thursday night last week when the heat was beating down in Madrid and there wasn't a breath of wind in the air. I was a little bit less enthusiastic than sometimes I might be, but having said that, game one was a cracker. Getafe had 17 players and no strikers and still managed to come away with a point from San Mamés. So yeah, that kind of reinvigorated me, and it was a really good first weekend of La Liga. I mean, part of that's down to sloppy teams, tired teams, very warm teams, but it was good fun to watch.
I think you might deserve a key to the club office because you just said, and I'm going to quote you on this, Adafe gave me renewed life watching Adafe. I think you were the very first person other than Bordalas who has ever said that.
That was the thing. You just weren't expecting it. You were not expecting to get your vitamins from Getafe, but they were really exciting to watch. And yes, I was describing Bordalas as La Liga's most loathed diesel engine. And yet he was the one to give me the most joy out of this weekend. So.
Well, hopefully Getafe, I mean, I hope they don't use up all of their joyful football on week one. We'll see. But before we get to all the big things to discuss today, I want to start with a little housekeeping here. Remember, at the moment, I am doing watch-alongs for games this season, and I would really enjoy seeing as many of the people listening or watching in there as possible. You can sign up for free at Tifo. That's not the Tifo with the Athletic, but Tifo, it is a new company where they are continuing to drop different things in these watch-alongs. So there's some exciting stuff on the horizon, including tactics and things like that. So again, that'll be rolling out in the next few weeks. Really excited about that stuff. But with the link in the description or show notes, and the promo code is Ola Culés, again, free to sign up. Patreons, a shout to you if you have a microphone and a camera set up. A perk of being a Patreon for as low as $3 so that you can join the show with me. And the call out, if you are a former guest on this show and you are available during watch-alongs, you can also jump in there and you can be on the show because, again, I trust you, I've talked to you before, and all those things. So former guests on the show and Patreons, you can actually join me in that watch-along. So hopefully I see a bunch of you for the Athletic Club match on Saturday. And secondly, as many of you heard, I did a good, bad, and ugly after the match against Valencia instead of the 5 headlines, as suggested by listener Tamir on the watch along. And then I got an email. So thank you to listener Josh. He suggested that instead of ugly, we instead turn that third category into a catch-all, as he said. So he went with high, low Buffalo, which it does rhyme, and that's really great. Unfortunately, Buffalo isn't great for the algorithms, as Buffalo is not really an animal that is native to Catalonia or Barcelona, unfortunately. I don't think there's ever been a Buffalo in Barcelona. So here's what I'm asking of all of you. I like that it rhymes. I like that it's catchy. But I am now looking for a word, hopefully that rhymes, in English, Spanish, or Catalan that is 2 or 3 syllables that connects to FC Barcelona or can be a fill-in word for anything in that third category. So if you're watching on YouTube, leave your ideas in the comments, or if you're listening on the podcast apps, send me a message anywhere on social media. So that is our little housekeeping. Thank you. I hope I didn't lose anybody at this point because there's exciting stuff that we're going to get back to right now, back to the business. Rory, because I just bored everybody, you and I are both pretty cold take guys, I would say. So I think I'm going to start with a hottest take, one of the hottest takes I've had on the show in a long time. So my hot take is this. For the Liga title race, Barcelona's own negative financial situation impacts the title race more than Real Madrid's team of superstars this season.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think Barcelona. It's as much as it is the things that do happen, the things that don't happen, in terms of addressing needs, in terms of bringing in players, selling players that perhaps you might not want to, and talk about Gundogan. It's more the way that these things happen. I think that is more of an issue, to be honest, because I mean, come kickoff time, Barcelona don't really care, and it's out of their minds, and they're focusing on the game, obviously. But that constant sense of chaos, the fact that it always seems like there's not a plan. I mean, you're looking at this as a player. I mean, especially Fermin Lopez, who's been on social media watching pirate streams of Barcelona. over the weekend and looking at what's going on, you're looking at that and thinking, right, okay, so they're trying to bring in a left winger to play Dani Olmo in my position or not to play Dani Olmo in my position. Where is he going to play? I think that just constant sense of uncertainty, the way that this is handled, the way that it always seems like they're improvising affects the club much more than any of the issues in terms of exactly, well, in some cases, I think holding midfielder, right back, those are issues that need to be addressed. But that constant sense of improvisation is really damaging to the club right now.
Yeah, I want to get to the Real Madrid part of, the hot take I just said there. That's topic two, because as you said, topic one is Barcelona very, very likely, maybe even by the time I hit publish, officially parting ways with their best player last season, Ilkay Gundogan, to open up space in their wage bill so that they can actually register players. That is why this is being done. This seems 100% financial. And after a summer of promises, it does really, really look like the Barcelona board are again writing checks that they can cash with all their owed money. So between the Nike deal going through so many ups and downs, and then the Libero money never arriving, and the Camp Nou construction being very exciting. I mean, it was cool to see what they released. I don't love the fact that it looks like a generic stadium, but that's another discussion for another time. But it's still a construction project in Spain, which you were very familiar with, that construction projects in Spain have no promises and no guarantees whatsoever. And now signing Dani Olmo now seems completely like fool's gold financially. And then the idea of Nico Williams was never actually that possible at all. And the irony too, they probably thought it was possible if they could resolve their financial loose ends. But they, whoever they is, were in denial themselves on how loose those ends really were. As in, Barcelona were promising that things were going to happen, and they really were saying, hey, in the best case scenario, and we've seen that a ton now, even with the Lewandowski, Koundé stuff, that, best case, the last, I mean, you were the first one on after all that stuff happened early, and we talked about, that if the best case scenarios happen financially with this, Barca does all this winning, all this stuff happens, great. But it seems like Barcelona keeps saying, hey, optimistically, glass half full, this is how it's going to go. And it keeps not working out that way. So looking at last summer, signing Vitor Roque, Gundogan, Ordo Romeu, Julian Araujo, and Inigo Martinez, plus João Felix and João Cancelo on loan, it's only going to be Inigo Martinez who possibly remains. That seems to me like awful squad planning now a year on. And the fact that this La Masia generation is so special shouldn't make up for the fact that long-term planning with transfers continues to be an issue. Even Dani Olmo, it could work out. I mean, he could really be great. He could be not say the season signing for La Liga, but it could all be great. Awesome, that's his position. But cynically speaking, the Catalan friends I have, it does feel like he was a signing for the Gamper Trophy presentation and the start of the season, because socios won't boo a Catalan coming home. They're not going to be upset with that kind of signing. So it winds up being more about fuzzy feelings than it does about football at all. So that would say that's my cynical approach to this, to say that, Barcelona have ideas and there is a path forward for everything financially to be working out. But because it hasn't, because Libero money didn't arrive, the Barca studio stuff is not complete yet, the Nike deal is still in flux, and all those different things, the guaranteed money is coming, but it's not there yet, which means that to register all your players and actually have a functional team, they've got to do this business that they didn't necessarily want to do. And that, again, is a big picture, really frustrating thing, because this was supposed to be, now we're 4 years on from when things really, really were terrible. And I made excuses for the first 2 to 3 years, but this was supposed to be that summer where they were getting back to the 1-to-1. And then next year they could do all of the buying and really be, a force again when the Camp Nou reopens, gate revenue is back to what it should be. So it's all boring finance stuff, but it has a major effect on what happens on the field. And so again, my hot take is that all of that disarray, as you mentioned, off the field of Barcelona and what that means for squad planning affects the title race more than it does Real Madrid actually just adding Kylian Mbappe and continuing to enhance their squad in all those ways, because as we'll get to them, they also lost an important piece, but that was all planned.
Yeah, absolutely. And looking at, I mean, we're coming off, 3-4 years since Barcelona's finances were really bad, since they were asking players to take pay cuts and to extend their deals in ways that long term were really not beneficial to the club. We're coming off that, and you look at the sales, they've not really made a big sale. And you look at the players that they've lost, and it's Leo Messi, who obviously best in the world at the time and very much your key player. You look at
I've heard of him. I mean, I'll watch some highlights later. Yeah, I've heard of him.
The one player of all of them that you don't want to lose, not even just from a sporting point of view, in terms of money, in terms of draw, in terms of pull, other players want to play with Messi. Then you look at Xavi's era, and he comes in. The one player that he wants to keep is Ousmane Dembele, the one player that he's kind of put his neck out on the line for more than anyone. And yes, okay, you can have your Dembele takes one way or another, but that was the player that Xavi wanted. Instead, you get Rafinha, and then this summer, yeah, best player last season, quite probably Ilkay Gundogan is gone because of the finances. So Barcelona keep losing the players that they really want to keep, and keep bringing in players that they keep wanting to shift. And in terms of Rafinha, I mean, okay, yeah, again, Rafinha, we've debated ad nauseum things about Rafinha, his value to the side, how good he is. But ultimately, Barcelona have tried to shift him on, or at least been open to it in the last few months. You look at Vitor Roque now, obviously, as well, Andreas Christensen. It's all these players that they keep bringing in and cannot shift because they've brought them in on big wages, and it's just so damaging. And if it was, thank the Lord for La Masia, it has to be said, for Barcelona, because if it wasn't for that, then they would be in really, really big trouble. Now they've got Cubarsí, you've got Bernal and Casado coming through, but without Gavi and Pedri's not La Masia, but he obviously came through as a kind of younger signing. But without these players, they really would be in a huge, huge hole.
Well, I'm going to completely zag on you, Rory, on the Gundogan thing for just a second, because I said my piece about Gundogan. I do, obviously, losing your best player is not great. And because of financial reasons, clearly wasn't part of the sporting plan. We know that that's true. There is another side of the Gundogan thing that could work out. And I'm using air quotes here for people watching. Could work out. Is Gundogan that big of a loss football wise in that spot? If in the 4-2-3-1, it's going to be Dani Olmo, Pedri, and Fermin Lopez. Plus, we've already seen that Rafinha will get some time there, or could get some time there, and Pau Victor is another option on the wing. Plus, most likely, Barcelona will be making another move for another winger like a Federico Chiesa on loan before the window is up. So while Gundogan was Barcelona's best player last season, and he does turn 34 in October, and I know he was their best player at 33 years old last season. Yes. You know what? We often criticize Barcelona for hanging on too long to players, and we give credit to Real Madrid for cutting bait at the right time. So there is this world where him going back to Man City, you think he's going to have a great year under Pep. Maybe this was the perfect time to say goodbye to his wages. Again, he leaves on a free. That's fine. He basically chose to, help Barcelona out by signing for them last year. So even though it's not a transfer fee or anything actually useful aside from wage relief, there is a world. Like, I'm not saying I hope things don't happen with Gundogan well, but I'm saying that football wise, with the roster they have, I did seem to have questions about how that number 10 spot, there would be enough time for everyone. It wasn't going to work. And now, you have, yes, two often injured players and a player who really is still a substitute in Fermin Lopez, who's continuing to emerge. I mean, he was a second leading scorer in Barcelona last year, to tell you where Barcelona was in getting their goals. But between Dani Olmo and Pedri, if you bring in another left winger, and Ferran Torres is sticking around, and again, you have Dani Rodriguez to give you a little bit of help from the academy, and you have either Tony Fernandez or Guy Fernandez, whatever it is. Like, you have your fourth or fifth options at the number 10 if it needs to be that way. So, yeah, my little zag for you is that maybe Barcelona does have the kind of squad to kind of make up for the loss of Gundogan in that 4-2-3-1, because they are taken care of in that attacking midfielder position. And, you don't want to be paying Gundogan for his drop-off, whenever that may be. Again, it might not be this year, but he also is turning 34. So it could be, and he's a midfielder who puts in a huge shift, does a lot of running, and played the most outfield minutes of anybody in the squad last year. So if anybody was going to take a step back this year, it might have physically actually been him. Are you buying my zag? I mean, I know it's a little bit of a Trojan horse, and obviously I gave you my actual opinion, but are you buying any of that at all?
It's an argument, and again, it's one of those things. It's like almost, it could really work out, and it could be absolutely fine. But it's more the intention or lack of intention in terms of Barcelona's part that is the big issue. Because Gundogan, I think in terms of numbers, his absence is kind of covered. I also think he could have played in that kind of deeper lying too, especially for games that aren't necessarily high demands in terms of, if you're not playing Real Madrid, you can play Gundogan in that spot and you're not going to get caught out as much as you would against Madrid, City, Champions League sides, basically. I think with Pedri, Fermin, Olmo, you touched on one of the areas I was going to go to. That will be important, is Gundogan was guaranteed production. Gundogan was guaranteed performance almost every week, week in, week out, every 3 days, despite his age. And maybe he does suffer a drop off, but you did have the squad to compensate for that. And yet you've also let Gundogan go now. And so you're relying on Pedri, Olmo, Fermin Lopez to produce. And then behind him, you're relying on Casado and Bernal to take a step forward. So you're essentially, what's happened here is you're sacrificing one of your better players who isn't necessarily a giant step back in the future of Barcelona in terms of in 2 years' time, you'd expect him to be gone anyway. It's not necessarily a giant kind of yeah mistake, I don't think. But on the other hand, he's going because they can't get rid of Ferran Torres,
Yeah.
Frenkie de Jong, other players that should be out the door before in Barcelona's eyes, definitely, and in many fans' eyes too. So yeah, again, it's sort of, it's not necessarily the consequence. It's more of the kind of planning and the thinking behind it is flawed, which is the big issue for me. And I think the one other area where Gundogan adds a lot to Barcelona, which they don't have, is what he did. Was he came out and he gave it to the players. He gave it to kind of the rest of the squad and said, "This is what needs to happen. This is how the attitude needs to be." He is one of the very few players in this Barcelona side now, Lewandowski being one, Ter Stegen being another, who has worked under really great managers, who has worked in teams that have won everything and is able to set that standard. So without him, you look at it and it's kids coming into that. It's Dani Olmo, who I like a lot and has just won Euro 2024 as one of the best players for Spain. But players that don't have that experience at that level, and his leadership in that group could have been really, really vital, because it looks, and then again, this is from the outside, this is kind of hearsay to a certain extent, but Lewandowski doesn't necessarily look like the sort of leader who is leading, not necessarily by example, but kind of pushing this team forward. He's certainly not dragging the team forward in terms of how they should play, in terms of here I am pressing at the front, follow behind me, at least in terms of the Valencia game. And yeah, you look at the other kind of leaders. Ter Stegen's obviously a goalkeeper. It's difficult for him to influence that much on the pitch. Gundogan was a leader, somebody that could stick people in the positions they needed to be. And you think Bernal, Casado, really great kind of young prospects, but wouldn't it be so great to have Gundogan teaching them exactly where to be and what to do this season, even if it's not him on the pitch all the time? So yeah, again, sorry, I'm straight batting you back with a yes. It's not necessarily a disaster, but it's the thinking that's the problem.
Yeah, I don't want to understate how important that leadership. And I don't think with Hansi Flick being the manager, I know there's a lot like, oh, Gundogan had rubbed the club the wrong way. Maybe he did rub the board with his comments and all that stuff. But under Hansi Flick, the manager that basically supported that exact mentality from this player, and also losing Sergio Roberto in that locker room, there's an argument that Barcelona did lose of their 4 Champions League winners. I mean, people can throw at me that maybe somebody else, but of their 4 players who started or were important parts of Champions League teams, they lost half of them. There's Lewandowski and Ter Stegen around, and Sergio Roberto and Gundogan are gone. So yeah, there could be a vacuum in the locker room that is
And
going to be important.
And if I can just come in there, I think one of the most worrying signs was Tony Kroos. Yeah, okay, he's a Real Madrid midfielder, and he's not afraid of poking fun at Barcelona and has done so in the past. But him commenting wow under kind of Gundogan going news, that's a bad sign, because Kroos does know his stuff, and he clearly knows how important Gundogan is and how much he can contribute. And yeah, it's one of those things that, like, you see it, and even if you're not necessarily, even kind of when you first see it, it's like you're working your way through the thought process, you're kind of weighing up pros and cons, you're thinking about the consequences of this, but the feeling is just an immediate kind of, this is wrong, this shouldn't be happening, this
Yeah.
wouldn't be happening somewhere else.
Yep. Yep. Completely. I mean, fortunately for me and this show and most culés, you went through the messy thing, and once you've done that, you can pretty much, once you've done the mental gymnastics of figuring out how that all happened, then everything else is an easier exercise. So as for the other 2 deals, speaking of easy exercises, Mika Faye to somewhere we don't know yet for around 10 million with a buyback, and Vitor Roque now apparently on a season-long loan to Real Betis. I was against some of the initial moves that I saw for these two, but if it is a buyback for Mika Faye and it is a season-long loan for Vitor Roque, because Hansi Flick this season was not sold on this version of either of them, whether they were too inexperienced or they weren't getting whatever it was. the manager was not sold on them. And this happens at every club, right? Regardless of wage bill or all the stuff behind the scenes. So if he wanted them to develop before he would use them, I've said it a ton of times before. Vitor Roque's salary wasn't really that much of an issue. So I kind of would have preferred for him to like stay in the system and stay in that world. But once Hansi Flick said, not in this way, then you knew he was going to have to go. But at this point, just every little bit helps. So getting Vitor Roque's salary off, again, it's not important. They don't need the money to sell him. They needed his salary off the books because of the small margin. So his, what it was like 3.5 million, I believe it was, and it stretched over 7-8 years. I do think financially sending him to Real Betis and really just hoping he succeeds there and it works out for him. That's, I think, actually okay business for the club, all things considered. I think selling him for 35 to 40 million to Saudi Arabia was not the move. And I do think that this is just, this could work out better for the club than, again, selling him on for Saudi Arabia and trying to cut your losses. So I'd rather have them take a little bit of a loss next season and see what they have with him. Because again, his salary, if he returns as a better player, it's a low enough number for the next few years where he could be really good value if Ferran Torres has moved on next season or whatever it is. And then for Mika Faye, same thing, that he is still very raw. I mentioned watching Barca Athletic all of last season that he made a lot of mistakes defensively. He really relied on his speed to make up for things, and he had a habit of just rash tackles or something like that because his raw tools, as in his physical abilities, his quick reading of the game, especially with the ball at his feet, are really good. Left back stuff, center back with a left foot, really good stuff, but he's absolutely not ready for the Barcelona first team this season. I kind of said that, and Hansi Flick agreed. And so getting him with a buyback for 10 million with that money, that's fine. Because if he does develop the way you'd hope he does, he's going to be worth 20 million or 30 million or whatever what that buyback is. And Barca can just go out and get him, and they take the 10 million now. So that happens in football too. I'm not, again, those deals didn't look great to me. And if those are actually the deals that happen, I'm fine with them. Because again, if Hansi Flick, if the manager doesn't want you, then it's not going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I kind of thought with Faye that it was maybe a little bit of poor man tax in the sense that because Barcelona are desperate for money, they maybe weren't getting what they should. But then I kind of look at Rafa Marin, who played a really good season for Alaves in La Liga, and Real Madrid probably got about 10, 15 million. I think it was 15 million for him in the end, plus some variables. And they obviously have their 50% sell on fee as well. So that gives them a chance to buy him back at half the price. So yeah, I think it's not necessarily a bad deal. I think, yeah, if he's not going to count for Flick, they have so many centre backs right now. And to be perfectly honest, given how many young players they have and given Araujo's out for a long time, I'd probably still rather have Inigo Martinez, accepting that he had a really bad game on Saturday. I'd probably still rather have him in the squad than I would Mika Faye. And then, yeah, Vitor Roque is an interesting one because I think on the face of it, it does make sense to loan him out. And I think it certainly saves some face for Deco and for Laporta that we're not giving up on him. We're just kind of making him or getting him to develop and giving him a chance to kind of adapt to European football. I think going from Atletico Paranaense to Barcelona is a huge jump. And I think normally these things did used to happen that way in terms of you look at Ivan Rakitic, who went to Sevilla first, then went to Barcelona. How many players did Barcelona buy from Sevilla during that kind of 10-year period or so when they were winning Europa Leagues? That intermediary step is the logical progression of a footballer. But because of the arms race in football now, we've gone straight to source for the big clubs, and they're now buying these kind of teenagers for 50, 60 million. And it doesn't make sense in terms of development. And even if you look at Real Madrid, I mean, Arda Güler looks like a brilliant talent, and I'm sure he'll kind of come on this season. But until Ancelotti came along, there were doubts about both Rodrigo and Vinicius' development. Reiner Jesus is one that obviously hasn't worked out for Real Madrid. Luka Jovic. These players do need those steps in between, I think. And I think some players will be able to do it. Some players will be able to make that jump. Barcelona have shown with their academy that they're pretty incredible. And I don't forget helps Roque that he has all these 18, 19-year-olds around him performing. But I think it's a logical step for him. For Barcelona, I think your big worry is that you've had two managers now look at him and say, not much use to me. You've had two managers look at him and say, right, okay, I'll have Mark Yu instead of him, starting him up front against Mallorca. I think either was a message to the board or was a message that he didn't believe in Roque. And the other one is Pau Victor as well, who signed him for 2.5 million, and yet you're trusting him over Roque, who you spent 30 million on. There should be an inquest as to how that happens. It just simply, again, I saw a good meme. Barcelona have been uh, tending towards memes in recent times, and I saw a good Succession meme of not Kendall Roy. Who's the father Roy?
Oh no,
Um,
sorry.
Brian Cox, the actor, saying "You are
Yeah,
not serious people," was essentially saying that to Barcelona, and I think that it can't happen. You cannot trust the player you spent 2.5 million on more than the player you spent 30, rising to 60 on.
Yeah, I mean, I was concerned when they brought him over 6 months early, the language without an adaptation period, and threw him right into a season between, again, the language barrier. It's just it a lot of times when you take a teenager from Brazil and throw them in midseason in January, there are more not success stories than success stories, and that regardless of where you go. So that was going to be an issue. You brought up Rodrigo and Vinny Jr., so that is a perfect transition because we're going to jump into the second half of our show a little bit quicker than the first half. Real Madrid did drop points. So the hot take I had that started, Barcelona is 2 points up on Real Madrid already. It doesn't matter because if Real Madrid, with the side they have, everyone's looking at 98 points or something like that, that's still very possible for Real Madrid this season. But what was noticed about the Real Madrid stuff is that Rodrigo's goal came after a really slow start, 13 minutes in. Mbappe, Bellingham, Rodrigo, Vinny Jr., it is the most dangerous front four in football. You feel it in moments throughout that game against Mallorca. You're like, oh, I mean, these guys could legitimately score eight goals against the right team this season, and those goals are going to pile up. And then the way they're doing it is that everything is going to the left. So tactical breakdown of Real Madrid is a little easier than Barcelona. It's just they take all of these great players, all these world-class players, and they put them all at the left at the same time. And then you have no options because all of those guys deserve a double team. And yet you have, in 1v1 situations, even a little bit of space for any of them, and the goals in the back of the net. On the other side, just real quick, for Mallorca, Mojica is a really good signing for Mallorca, the South American experienced left back. Sergi Darder, as Espanyol fans know, is the kind of player that can help you stay up in the Liga. And then Asano will be the important signing for Mallorca this season if he winds up being worth, 8 or 10 million, whatever they bought him for. And then holding on to Muriqi, not only for the clubs that are looking to be mid-table or fight off relegation in the Liga, this summer, and we'll get to this when we talk about the transfers, it was just as important to keep the players you had than it was to try to enhance your team and get a bigger signing. A lot of teams lost pieces as opposed to gaining pieces, or just keeping Muriqi was important, as evidenced by his header goal against Real Madrid. So, I think Mallorca already did show you what the strategy against Real Madrid was going to be in the Liga. When you watch Los Blancos and seeing them against Atlanta, that's a team that obviously I think should be favorites to win the Champions League, because usually they are in mentality, even if they're not as talented as Bayern Munich or whoever it may be. And so, or Man City. So I think, obviously Real Madrid, the absolute favorite to win a back-to-back Champions League again here. And in La Liga, that would be, I think, the one solace, that this is a team that is capable of, because of that lack of Toni Kroos. You do feel a lack of control sometimes with them in the midfield. And I think you saw that against Atlanta. I think you're going to see that in La Liga too. There could be just a bit of a drop in the midfield, in the control of a game. And if the other underdogs are able to defend like heck, have a goalkeeper standing on his head the way that many times they did against Lionel Messi through the years, whoever it was Cadiz or Mallorca themselves or whatever it was. So if they are able, that being the opposition goalkeepers, able to stand on their head, and then a fluky goal happens on a corner or whatever it is, and Real Madrid have a bad 10 minutes and they concede a goal or two, and then they're unable to put it behind. I know this is how football works and scores, but I'm just saying, I think having watched that match, there's a path for Real Madrid to drop a few points in La Liga that obviously in the Champions League, they're still a favorite to get, because this is still the best team in world football. It's the most attacking front, or it's the most dangerous front four in football. All of that works out. But again, there's also a way where this doesn't necessarily work. Rodrigo doesn't love, even though he had the goal, he doesn't love where his position is and all that stuff. So I think Real Madrid's still the favorite, obviously, but I'm just saying that Real Madrid had, at least in the Liga, they're going to show you, I think, a few of the ways that it's not going to be perfect this season for them.
Yeah, Carlo Ancelotti is a very cunning manager. He doesn't get enough credit for how well he kind of plans out his seasons, I think, because even if you look at last season, Real Madrid weren't particularly impressive until the second half of the year, certainly about February time they start to pick it up. That's the general pattern for Ancelotti teams. And so I think Ancelotti's general strategy is, right, okay, we're going to go through some teething problems, we're going to change a few things. That's going to affect us until we come out of the kind of winter January spell, but as long as we're there or thereabouts, we've got enough of gas in the tank to kind of take it home. And you saw that last season they did it. Jude Bellingham went on kind of superhero form for about 3-4 months where he just scored winners late again and again and again, and Real Madrid pulled out these results. So if they're not doing that, there is the danger that they drop points, and that's where Barcelona have to really kind of, I think they probably have to go into the second half of the season with 4 or 5 points advantage if they
Mm-hmm.
want to win this league title. I think with where the cunning comes in is that Ancelotti will have been annoyed. He was annoyed after the game. He questioned their attitude. He was really quite forceful in a way that Ancelotti isn't normally. So if you hark back to about 10 months ago, so October, November time when Mbappe to come to Real Madrid was kind of starting to pick up again and rumours were starting and whatnot. Florentino Perez wants to see Rodrigo, Mbappe, Bellingham, Vinicius. He wants to see them all on the pitch at the same time, and he wants to see them filling the Bernabeu week in, week out with fans delighted to see that kind of rampant front four. Carlo Ancelotti is a smart football man. He knows that that is a fundamentally unbalanced starting 11, regardless of who you have in behind them. So he's going to have to work on that. And so there is a chance that this clicks and they just end up blowing people away. The other side of this is that if there are teething problems, if there are issues, if it's unbalanced, then Carlo Ancelotti has the ammunition by October, November time already to go to Florentino Perez and say, look, this isn't working. We need to balance the side more. I'm going to drop Rodrigo because he's the only one you can drop out of that kind of front four. So I
I
think
think you were going to suggest. I thought you were going to suggest selling Kylian Mbappe in January. That's what I thought you were going to say, but if got Rodrigo,
Mbappe is clearly the thing that's making this not work here.
yeah,
So
yeah,
yes, sell Mbappe. But no, I think yeah, he's setting up his arguments with Florentino Perez already to say we're going to need to change this for the big games and we're going to need to adapt ourselves. And yeah, we saw them against City kind of work out a way to play, but even that was very defensive. And you saw Bellingham kind of out of sorts in those City games last season. And Ancelotti knows what he's doing, and he knows that these first 2-3 months are for him to basically lay some cards on the table, see what sticks, see what doesn't, and then he's going to have to work out in midfield because yeah, Toni Kroos' lack of him is a problem. I think Valverde and Tchouaméni are really good midfielders in their own right, but neither of them have that presence of mind to kind of direct game. And Modric, he does have that presence of mind, but he doesn't tend to do it from quite as deep. And then you have to kind of look at, right, okay, can I get kind of 90 minutes out of him? No. So do I play him for 60 and then just throw on Camavinga and whatnot? Those are issues that Ancelotti will have to solve. But the big one is for him to be able to go in October, November, this is the way we're going, this is the way we're playing.
yeah. There's some irony too in that we talk about these sides as complete sides, yet the last two Liga races in 2 years ago with Lewandowski leading Barcelona in September through November, and then last season Bellingham doing the same thing for Real Madrid, September through November. That the Liga race the last 2 years was decided by basically one player scoring goals in the early part of the season and creating a little bit of distance while the other side kind of dropped points. So it was the last 2 years have been more about the other teams around you dropping points and you being saved by one player. And then by the time that Barcelona was better in the spring 2 years ago and Real Madrid was better in the spring last year, the title race was already kind of decided. And now we're talking about other things. The title race hopefully is a 3-team race this season because Atletico Madrid, who also dropped points, unless having watched parts of that match, most parts of that match, unless they are planning to get another center back with some speed, they're going to struggle with faster wingers and forwards. I think they kind of showed you that. Alex Witzel, they're going to try to, that being other teams, going to try to continue to put him on an island. There's a lot of space there in that back five or back three when they're attacking. So if they give the ball up in the center of the field and as well in the midfield, Koke it isn't really the quickest anymore, and it's difficult to kind of shut down those channels. So again, wingers and forwards on the opposition that overload the midfield and then kind of stretch out with one long ball. I think that'll be a defensive problem for them. On the other side, attacking will not be an issue for them. Julian Alvarez and Alexander Sorloth, those are the two big signings for any club in the Liga this season. I know Sorloth went from Villarreal to Atletico Madrid, but Julian Alvarez, Kylian Mbappe was going to happen. Danny Olmos is Barcelona's, but Julian Alvarez is the intention signing, I think, this summer in the Liga. And probably to me, again, because Mbappe always felt like it was going to happen, Julian Alvarez is like the big exciting signing in the Liga this season. And Atletico Madrid, even though they drop points and they're going to have their issues as well, I do think, and actually there's no air quotes on those, they're going to have their issues as well. We have to continue to practice the thing we've been practicing now for 2 years, Rory, and say, oh, Diego Simeone, Atletico Madrid, this is who they are. But that's not who they are anymore. It's absolutely not who they are anymore. And Atletico Madrid now on paper, though, if Diego Simeone can continue to kind of get away from who he wants to be and they can figure something out and put it all together as a unit, Atletico Madrid on paper is just as good, I think, in this title race as Barcelona. And then, okay, Real Madrid, who is dropping points, whatever you want, the worst case of Real Madrid that we talked about.
Yeah, I think the Julian Alvarez signing was really smart because I think he's a marquee signing. He is a statement signing, as you say. He's a player that I don't think many people thought they could get in, including people at Atleti, I don't think. But they did manage to bring him in, and I think it's ultimately, you look at Griezmann, he's probably going in 1 to 2 years' time, maybe 3 at a very, very long push, but he's been playing a lot of games. He's been playing consistently. He's 130, 140 caps for France as well. He doesn't have the legs necessarily to keep going at this level for the next few years. So Julian Alvarez is your eventual replacement for him, I think, in terms of marquee player, in terms of star attraction. Where I think I'm a little bit lower on Atleti than most people is a lot of people have looked at Surlot, who second top goal scorer in the league, Lenormand, Euro 2024 winner with Spain, Gallagher now as well is obviously through the door from Chelsea, and and he was playing in the final as well. I think they are all very good players. Are they players that move the needle for me? I think Sorloth is a good player, but not necessarily somebody that moves the needle. I think even if you look at last season, he was arguably even streakier than Alvaro Morata, who obviously was basically booed out of the club by the time he was leaving because he was swivering in between this and that. Surlot had, I think, about 5 goals until January, February time, and then just went on an insane run with Villarreal. He is a very useful striker outside of the goal, so if you can have Julian Alvarez and Griezmann scoring a lot, that gives you the goals you need, plus Surlot will give you kind of the movement you want, but he's not necessarily, he doesn't change the kind of way you look at this team. He's not somebody that imposes fear. Lenormand, a player I really like, is really good, but I think he's one of those measuring stick guys in terms of if your defense is really good, I think Lenormand looks really, really good. He plays very well and he's not going to make too many mistakes. If your defense is struggling, I don't think he's necessarily going to be the person to fix it. Similarly, if you look at that other side, they are trying to bring in a different centre-back. Another one, they're trying to bring in David Ančko from Feyenoord, who's a Slovakian centre-back who is good, but again, untested at this level. And Clement Lenglet, as I'm sure Barcelona fans will know, is the kind of alternative if that fails. And Lenglet, again, I think he's kind of similar to Lenormand in some senses in terms of if the defense around him is working, he will be fine. He won't make too many mistakes. If it's struggling, if it's getting stretched, Lenglet will be exposed. And so, I think it's quite a top-heavy Atleti team. I think it's a team that will be quite a distance away from the travelling pack. I think Girona obviously was a miracle season last year, but Atleti will be clear in third, maybe challenging for second. But in terms of winning the title, I'm not necessarily sure they have that extra push. And ultimately, if you look at the 2 Simeone title wins, both of them, they've not really been that attacking side, but also Real Madrid and Barcelona have had big down years. So you need that to happen if you're Atleti to close that gap. And Real Madrid have just added Kylian Mbappe, so it's hard to see them having that drop off.
Well, I think it's disappointing to me to say, and kind of almost agree with you, that I think Atletico Madrid is closer to Barcelona than Barcelona is Real Madrid. And that's kind of, I think, the frustrating, resolution for what the title race is. But there's still I always tell people, watch the Liga, though, because there's still fun to have in the Liga. One of the games I had a little bit of fun with this weekend that I wanted to highlight was the Las Palmas-Sevilla match. I really like Las Palmas' jerseys this season. They're really nice. The tough thing about going all in on Barcelona is you can't dabble in other teams' jerseys and things like that. I also don't have the funds too. So big sponsors, if you're listening, I would love to get a Las Palmas jersey. That'd be nice. But they had a 2-2 draw, that being Las Palmas with Sevilla to start the season in the Garcia Pimienta derby. And the series was the loss for Sevilla, the big loss. He doesn't really fit what Garcia Pimienta wants to do with your center forward, but he was so important for them for the last few seasons. But so it goes against kind of two things where Sevilla and the series was emblematic of the fact that Sevilla was just surviving, just continue to survive, to have bad starts, fight relegation when you shouldn't be, and just try your best to be in the top 7 somewhere, top 10. But now under Garcia Pimienta, you kind of want a system. You want a unit and you want stability. That's why you add that player. That's why you add that manager. And Nasiri, again, he was emblematic of a team that was just desperately trying to get goals. So a gigantic striker was scoring goals, whatever. How much faith or excitement would you have with Garcia Pimienta kind of bringing Sevilla back up to that, fighting for a Champions League spot status that they haven't been in a few seasons now?
I think this season it's going to be a step too far. I think there's so much flux around the squad as well. I mean, they're not flush for funds. They're trying to kind of move on a lot of players and then replace them with kind of cheaper alternatives, cheaper and younger alternatives. But that obviously takes some time. I think with Garcia Pimienta, even at Las Palmas, where he did a brilliant job, it took him 3, 4, 5, 6 months to really kind of impose his style of play and get the players kind of conditioned to how he wanted them to play. They're coming off 3 seasons with, I want to say, 6 different managers and quite a lot of different styles of play as well. So you're looking at kind of a lot of different ideas being put into the players' heads, a lot of kind of new players coming in. So I think Garcia Pimienta is going to take some time with Sevilla. If it gets the time, if he manages to kind of keep them ticking along nicely enough for those 6 months, because Sevilla is a very hot club. The temperature rises pretty fast in Seville. So if things are going wrong, then there's a chance that things just kind of capsize. But if he manages to keep them kind of above water and floating along nicely enough, 4, 6, 7 months, then I think you could really see the benefits of Garcia Pimienta and what he can do. But yeah, I do worry about them. And ultimately, Isaac Romero is the kind of new hope up front, and he had kind of 3 or 4 really good months last season. If he can score the goals, then that makes a big difference for them. But they don't necessarily have another kind of striker who you have faith in. Kelechi Iheanacho, fans of Leicester's post-Premier League win season may remember. He is the signing up front, and he's not exactly been in the goals of late. So we'll see how he does.
Yeah, I mean, multi-year, not of late. So, I mean, I think his last year, I think he's like 27-ish now, and his last good goal-scoring year was when he was 22 years old. So it's been a while for him. And then the last little thing that I want to do as far as the games from the weekend, then we'll finish with some transfers. The 2-1 Rayo Vallecano, I'd say it was more of a defeat for Real Sociedad than it was a win for Rayo Vallecano. And Real Sociedad, I think, from the first weekend is the one team that I really, really want to scream the alarm bells for, because if Mikel Merino is on his way to Arsenal, they did lose Lineman, and if Zubamendi is going to Liverpool, the academy in San Sebastian has been great for them, but I do think that they could really struggle this season. Lucas Sucic, the 21-year-old midfielder from RB Salzburg, they are putting a lot on that signing. I mean, I guess they are. Maybe they have a few more loans, or, that's a team that I could see taking that Merino money, taking potential Zubamendi money, taking the Lineman money, and making some splash or two, 1 or 2 signings. So I don't want to say that they're done and dusted when there's still the transfer window to be opened. But if they're unable to reinforce the squad, and that team that we saw against Rayo Vallecano is the one that they're going to do this season with, I think Real Sociedad are in a world of hurt. And by that, I mean, for them, their expectations are fight for Champions League. And I think you could see them somewhere between 12 and 15 this year. I mean, that's how bad it could be if that's the squad that they put together.
I think they'll be better than that. I think there's about 5 teams who all have doubts about them between 4th and 8th. So Betis, Real Sociedad, Athletic are back in Europe. Girona, obviously, coming from their squad being absolutely pillaged by big clubs across Europe. And Villarreal, who don't have Europe, the only side amongst them that don't have Europe, but do have a decent enough squad and a brilliant manager in Marcelino. So I think those 5 sides will... I think that was 5. Those 5 sides will kind of duke it out and try and be in a big kind of Royal Rumble for that 4th spot almost. Subimendi is going to stay, so that is huge for them.
Yeah.
I think one to watch is Beñat Torrientes, who is a midfielder who I really like to make the leap. He was kind of coming off the bench for Spain's Olympic team, and he's a really nice player, and he can do pretty much everything you ask him to in midfield. So I really like him. I think Real Sociedad will be fine. For me, the two big issues are more so than midfield are actually in defence. Lenormand going. It looks like they're going to trust Jon Martin, who's a kind of younger player, and try and bring in kind of another centre half. But what kind of caliber, or if it is it a centre half to kind of tide him over for the year, or is it somebody that's going to be there for kind of 5-6 years? Is the question. Peribai, the president, says probably someone just to tide him over. And then the other big thing is the age-old issue with Real Sociedad. Ever since Alexander Isak left, they've not really had a striker score loads of goals. And Oyarzabal does a good job through the middle, but Imanol Alguacil, you can tell he's crying out for somebody to score him the goals. Sadiq hasn't worked out. They're trying to replace him. So whoever they get through the door in these last kind of 5, 6, 7 days to go up front, I think that will be maybe the most decisive part of their season.
Yeah, we've talked a lot of transfers here because I just want to kind of sum this up with a big idea about La Liga transfers in general. Because for the third or fourth straight summer, I feel like we're talking more about the players who left these clubs than the players who arrived. Because sure, there was Kylian Mbappe, Dani Olmo, Julian Alvarez, but a bunch of teams, especially as we just talked about, Villarreal and Real Sociedad, they lost big pieces and there weren't too many other big acquisitions. Girona losing, as you mentioned, Artem Dovbyk to Roma, maybe the biggest loss of all for any team in the Liga. And replacing him is going to be almost impossible. So that's kind of the gloom and doom there. But I guess here's some names that I do like, and not to say I'm excited for, but I'm hoping that all these signings kind of work out. And Alejandro Frances, the 22-year-old center back from Real Zaragoza, he was linked to Barcelona for the last 2-3 years, even from Zaragoza. He was arguably kind of like the top prospect, if you want to call it, in the Segunda Division for the last few seasons. He could be a steal for Girona. And then Lucien Agome, who played for Sevilla last year. They got him permanently for $4 million. He is still a former top defensive midfield prospect for Inter Milan, back on loan, and he's still just 22 years old. So I mean, maybe there's something there. But again, he's, as you said to me beforehand, he's a fine player. He's a good player, but it doesn't excite anybody. Osasuna getting Brian Zaragoza, because he played for them last year, doesn't seem exciting, but getting him back on loan from Bayern Munich, that could be huge for them keeping their place this season. And then Iras Moriba to Celta on loan from RB Leipzig. He's still just 21. Nobody, I think, on other, again, Football España, I don't plan on reading about Iras Moriba to Celta. But, for our purposes on the podcast, is the one I'll have my eye on. And then same with Brian Giel to Girona on loan from Tottenham. And then Donny van de Beek to Girona for super cheap from Manchester United. So not really worrying about what Manchester United had to give up in that deal money-wise. But Van de Beek has stuff to prove still, and for that cheap of a price, could be good business for Girona, very much like the Daily Blind deal was a few seasons ago. And then speaking of Tottenham loans, Alejo Valise, a 20-year-old center forward, plus defensive midfielder Alex Kral from Union Berlin. Those are two huge loans for Espanyol to help them stay up. So that actually might be just enough talent for them to stay up. Who knows? And then Ricardo Rodriguez, the Swiss left back, that I think people who watch international football are very familiar with at this point, could be a big pickup for Real Betis, at least in their locker room. I mean, I feel like I went through the list and those are the signings that I named. So if you have any others, you could throw names out there. But my favorite question for you is, do you think there could be more movement for the rest of the window? Or do you think that not just Barcelona, all the FFP troubles for every club that's not Real Madrid, do you think that's going to be an issue with the Liga's transfer window? And those are the names we're talking about and trying to get excited about. Because again, for Football España and stuff, good luck to you writing about all the big signings in the Liga this summer that isn't Julian Alvarez or even like inner league between Sorloth and Lenormand and stuff.
Yeah, I think, we've talked a lot about players that have been lost, but ultimately, I think a lot of these teams are still trying to replace those guys. And I think with kind of, you look at Villarreal and they're bringing in, I think, Barry is his name, Tierno Barry, which is a great name because Tierno, not with an H, but in Spanish, Tierno Barry means gentle Barry. So that's a really good name for Spain. But yeah, he's going to come in. He's an interesting, huge centre forward from Basel. He's 21 years old. He could be interesting. I think there'll be a lot of movement in the last kind of 4 or 5 days. I think a lot of these teams that brought in money are still trying to get people through the door. And even if you look at Real Sociedad, they're still just closing up that Mika Marino deal to Arsenal, so they'll have a bit of money to play with. I think Sevilla not so much. Girona will probably make one or two moves. You'll see that kind of the city links. You'll see somebody come in, I think. With Real Betis, obviously Vitor Roque is kind of the big signing there, I think, to expect. And yeah, I think it will be interesting. And the one thing with La Liga, it keeps producing stars. You keep unearthing these youngsters that come from nowhere. Brian Zaragoza was known to approximately the people in Granada and maybe a couple more last season, and by the end of it, he was playing for Bayern Munich. And okay, that didn't work out, but it's an example of how quickly these stars can arise. You look at Raúl Moro, who played really well for Valladolid in the opening weekend. Former Barcelona academy player, moved to Lazio for 5 million, and hadn't worked out, but looked really good against Espanyol. So I think you will see these people kind of make a name for themselves. Even like Mika Maramol, who last season kind of went up with Las Palmas, was signed by them, made a real name for himself in La Liga. Those kind of players that have been kicking around previously at big clubs and have been kind of signed by these kind of middling, kind of mid-table teams to try and do a job, they tend to emerge about kind of October, November time. You get really excited about them.
Well, the next one, La Masia, speaking of the last piece of news, is the U19 left back that I did cover for the YouTube shorts, Albert Navarro, will join Atalanta for 2 million euros. So that's another deal that Barcelona are making, and that's permanent. And they do have a sell-on fee or whatever it is. But I mean, he wasn't a top prospect as a left back. He was just a tall, lanky kid. Good luck to him, Alberto Navarro. But yeah, as you mentioned, Rory, you are terrific at finding the excitement or making the best of what could be a negative perception of a Liga with all the young players and exciting young players to talk about. So, Rory, thank you so much for all this time today. Yeah, what do you have cooking already this season? As we gave some names out there, but now it's time to actually watch the matches and write about them. So what do you have cooking for the season?
Yeah, I mean, we'll have the column. We'll be back, the weekly Football España column. We've got some really great writers on there, so we'll probably have some Barcelona content on there, as well as covering kind of the other big teams. I mean, we've got Jeremy Byrne from Inter de Calderón, Jose Perez, who's written for Managing Madrid as well, and Kai Iliev as well, who writes a lot of Barcelona stuff. So there will be a lot of content on the column. I myself will be kind of doing a more or less weekly kind of summary piece or seeing kind of picking out the interesting details from the weekend. And yes, as I said at the end of the Getafe inspired piece, I'm either a hopeless romantic or I'm in an abusive, addictive relationship with football. So it's one of the two. It just depends which way you look at it.
Hopeless romantic, I think, is the right way to see it, Rory. So again, thank you so much for your time. The links for Football España and Rory are down in the show notes or description below. And then remember, Patreons, the Barcelona podcast, as low as $3. That is how you actually even get on the watch along. And the watch along for this week is for the Athletic Club match. That is also in the show notes or description below with the promo code Ola Culés. Again, we're continue to build on that, have some fun with that. And remember, give me those names. Help me name the 5 headlines for the season or whatever is taking their place. And then you can follow along Twitter, Instagram, closed Facebook group, as well as the Discord. So a good rating on the podcast app, subscribing to the YouTube channel, as Rory knows, the Football España. Just following along, subscribing. Those are the best ways to help. And most importantly, thanks so much for listening to the show. Until next time, we'll talk to you soon. Enforce the bright side.